Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of ECC Essentials. This week, we have Timm with us. If you're not familiar with Timm, which I would be surprised if you're not, he is a former LAPD 911 dispatcher who founded the Healthy Dispatcher and now is out in the industry training and consulting. And if you are watching live, looks like I may have frozen, but hopefully you're still able to hear me okay. For those who might be listening to this recording later, remember you can catch the live broadcast every other Thursday at 2 Central if you want to join in on the conversation as well. So we are here to talk about culture, communication. One of the main goals of the ECC Essentials is to really talk about and help people with those topics that are relevant to what's going on in the center, the essentials of the center. So one of those is, of course, communication. And as we face staffing challenges and then culture issues that come along with those, we might find ourselves communicating less to save time, energy. But Adam is going to share with us what we really should be doing when it comes to communication.
Thanks, Halcyon. And look at, we're already blowing up the chat. We've got Erica Lakey, Laramie, Jessica, Trey, Melanie Jones. Thank you for joining us. This is awesome. Amy. So what I'm excited to talk about with you, Halcyon, is this idea that if we're trying to change our culture, our center's culture, because we can't hire, we can't retain, we can't keep people in the center. And as a result, we're mandating overtime. We're doing more and more work with less and less people. The temptation from an operational perspective is to stop proactively finding opportunities to connect with our people. So we stop doing quality assurance, or we stop doing one-on-ones, or we, because the working supervisors are also now backfilling positions, we stop creating time to connect with our direct reports if we're in a supervisory role, because there's just so many things, and we tend to the tasks. And as the ship sinks, we are busying ourselves with the tasks surrounding us. Naturally, obviously, because the tasks still must get accomplished. But when we disband proactive communication, meaning finding any way to connect with our people, we shouldn't be surprised that we lose our people, both metaphorically and literally as they walk out the door. Hey, Melinda. Hey, Rebecca.
Yeah, we go into like energy saving mode, and we're like, okay, what can we cut out that we maybe think isn't the important tasks? And it's actually counterintuitive.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And so what I've seen work is increasing the frequency of communication by whatever means possible. And if you're going to increase the frequency of these communication touch points, effectiveness is important too. Mm-hmm. So we need two things. We need frequent communication and we need effective communication. And what does that look like? So if you're, actually, I'd love to throw that poll up. This is a question for those of you who are tuned in live. There's a poll. I'd like to know, in the last year, how many of you have been working on your culture, meaning you've tried to change aspects of your culture, you've had a conversation about culture, or you've gone to a conference and you've sat there in a breakout session going, our culture sucks, which means you have some awareness to something that needs to change. So put yes there. You can also opt out if you're just going to put no, but you can put no too if you'd like.
Looks like the majority have been, and maybe we should go a little further and say it doesn't necessarily mean everybody's on board, but if there's been the attempt to make the changes.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that culture is really is difficult to change. It's also difficult to put your finger on what culture really is, what it looks like. We all know when it's bad, because it's tough to go into work. Like that is your most clear illustration or clear effect of a culture that needs changing is you don't want to go to work. And because that hesitancy, that reluctance to go into work, it's a confluence of many different factors. You might blame it on one particular coworker, that coworker, the angry atoms of the bunch. But it's more than just that. It's the policies and the procedures. It's the levels of accountability that lend themselves to the creation of this dynamic, if it's an interpersonal dynamic. And all of these things are the realm of culture. And so everyone wants to change culture. Everyone here, it looks like, apparently, or at least a very high percentage. How do we change culture without increasing our frequency of communication? Because culture is formed through the practice of behaviors over time. In fact, the definition of culture is that it's the product, it's the result of all the ways of thinking and behaving, the way we treat each other, the way we adhere to the core values or not, the way that we practice the policies and procedures, the way that we show up together. All of these things taken together over time produce organizational culture. So in order to change culture, we need to change the behaviors that have led to the culture that exists. In order to change behavior, we must talk about it. We must address it. We must highlight the aspects, the behaviors that need changing. We must hold each other accountable. We must hold ourselves accountable. We must take responsibility for our impact on culture. All of that requires more communication. And as we've already mentioned, we stop communicating as people get mandated. They go to their console. One thing that's really surprising, or I should say that surprised me when I left the LAPD, which has now been 10 years, actually 10 years in October of this year that I left the front line. Next month, actually in 1 week, will be my 20th year in 911.
That's exciting.
I know, it's super exciting. I was surprised to find that most centers, and I would love if you're tuned in live in the chat to just mention this, say me too, in response to this question. I was surprised to find that most centers don't have a consistent way of bringing the team together on a shift by shift basis. So at the LAPD, and I found that this is true with many large agencies. So I was one of 650 line level dispatchers. We had 50 or 60 people coming on shift each day. We started our shift in the roll call room. So we reported to the roll call room, and the roll call training, or the roll call, was the first 30 minutes of our shift. So all 50 or 60 of us saw who was on shift. We're sitting in there. They would take roll. So tell us where our shift assignment was. They would make announcements for things going on in the city. They would do a quick training topic, and then we would relieve the off-going watch. I didn't realize that single touch point, the first 20 or 30 minutes of our shift each day, was a great way of kind of seeing who your team was, enhancing communication. At least we have a venue by which we can bring these things forward. When I left LAPD, I found that most centers, when you come to work, you just sit down at the console that you're taking over. So say, yes, that's the way it is, if it is that way at your center, if you're tuning in live. Now, you might say, well, okay, yeah, that's how it is. What's the problem with that? Especially if that's the way we've always done it. The problem is that's your only touch point that you can consistently rely on, and each day after day, for years. And that's not even really an opportunity to communicate in the traditional sense of the word. Pass down allows some communication, but how do we expect to set a standard for behavior, how it's supposed to be around here, how it's supposed to feel around here, if we don't take some time, at least once a month, to bring people together and talk about what it means to work here?
Well, it's also kind of compounded, right? So coming from a small center, not only do we not have like that official, if you will, or formal touch point, those people have been there for 12 hours. They are staying solely to give me what I need to know for my shift. And then, just short of literally running out there because they got to be back in 12 hours.
Yeah.
So they're not running away from us, but it's almost too kind of that subtle, like, not only are they not going to talk, they're out as fast as they can be.
Yeah, naturally, it's the end of the shift, so like they're 1 foot out the door, possibly 5 minutes before their shift ends anyway,
right?
Which is fine. I was the same way. As soon as the next watch came out of the roll call room, I was like, my stuff was already packed up. I was already ready to go. I was like halfway pulled out of the headset jack or the headphone jack, and so if that is the norm. I encourage those of you who are here asking these questions today, how might you introduce more frequent and regular communication touch points? And it's really about finding opportunities. And it's likely not realistic for you to have all watches meet in one room once a month. Someone's got to work, right? However, if you're in a supervisory role or a formal leadership role, as we say, formal leadership role is one who has a title. You have positional power and authority granted to you by your position in the hierarchy. You're in a formal leadership role. If you are in a formal leadership role, and part of your formal leadership role is that you have direct reports, finding 5 to 10 minutes each day to connect with them authentically as a human being. And yes, through the lens of the organization's aims, desires, needs, but really from a human perspective, that's valuable. In fact, it's even more valuable when you think of how powerful building a relationship is with your direct reports. It's possible that at your center today, right now, there are people who have 1 foot out the door. They've been looking at job postings. They've been contemplating a major life change, which I think we take it for granted that it is a major life decision to leave any job, even a new job, because we see the revolving door and we've kind of accepted as an industry that this is just how 911 is. We think that it's easy to leave a job, even for people who are just starting as in the training program or are 6 to 12 months in. I think that leaving a job for granted is probably why we still have bullying and hazing. Like the bullies and those who are hazing people saying like, the training program doesn't prepare them. So this is obviously not a good candidate for our agency. So it's my job to bully them out. Like it's not easy to leave a job no matter where you are, who you are.
Right. And because it upsets your whole life. Like that's your income. You get in a routine, especially when it's been a while. But I want to go back really quickly and just touch on how you said authentic communication.
Yeah.
Because you might touch on this, so I apologize if I'm jumping ahead, but I would just like to put it out there. More emails does not equal more communication. I think sometimes we think, if I just keep emailing updates, I'm communicating with my people, but that's not really what we're talking about as far as that authentic communication.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, and what I'm sometimes seeing is the interpretation of this message, which I have been sharing this message. We need more communication, not less. People will say, well, people are already drowning in emails. Yeah, exactly. It's not more communication doesn't mean more emails. And in fact, it's a holdover. So the frequency of emails that we see now as just part of daily life is a holdover from the pandemic. And we may not even regard it as like this new normal. And we had to do that for the pandemic. Like we had to lead and manage through email. That was just part of it. Some of us have not gone back to the in-person touch points And so when I'm saying more frequent communication, I'm specifically talking about more frequent one-on-one, person-to-person touch points. In fact, I know that there's people on this call right now who felt relieved on some way that, oh, I don't have to talk with people face to face. I get to work from home. I get to shoot emails. I get to manage by sending emails. And that because there's comfortableness with hiding behind the workstation, hiding behind an email, that when you're vulnerable, putting yourself out there, when you're in the arena, as Brene Brown says, based on that poem, by that title, In the Arena. I can't remember who wrote the poem.
Teddy Roosevelt.
It's a vulnerable place to be.
Yeah.
And to actually extend yourself, to talk with people, to like be uncomfortable with another human being.
So not okay with being uncomfortable. And I don't think the pandemic created that, but it didn't help it.
No. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, I'm just checking up on the chat here. Yeah, we have overlapping shifts. We have one person coming in, joining the shift to relieve someone. We just show up and take over. I found that is, in fact, the norm. And so if that is the norm, then the structures currently in place at your center are not conducive to naturally finding ways to communicate with others. And especially for those who are in a formal leadership role, meaning your supervisor, CTO, you're going to have to expend effort to increase the communication touch points. Mm-hmm. And so what does that mean? Well, it means looking at your daily mix and finding times to walk the floor. Finding times, and if you say, well, there's other direct reports that aren't necessarily under my chart, they're not assigned to me as a supervisor on the floor. Should I make touch points with them? Should I talk with them as well? I'm of the mind that if your organizational hierarchy has dictated that you have at LAPD, each supervisor, so we had about 60 supervisors across the entire organization, and each supervisor had like 10 to 15 people assigned to them. That supervisor could only be expected to do the quality assurance, the touch points, the discipline for the people assigned to them. So and I'm of the same mind that the people who are assigned to you are your primary responsibility. That doesn't mean that if you see someone that is having a tough day or a tough time, and they're assigned to someone else, you just ignore them. I mean, that's part of being a compassionate and empathic leader, right? But starting somewhere, if you're not making any authentic touch points with people from a communication perspective, starting with the people who are assigned to you is a great place to start. I like breaking these big things down. Like a culture change initiative takes a year and a half to 2 years. It's a lot of things happening over a long period of time. How do you start a culture change initiative? One conversation at a time. And so I like breaking these big ideas down into like, what is some specific action I can take today that will lead me through consistency, through consistent practice, through consistent awareness, lead me to where I need to be, to where the organization needs to be. You mentioned something, Halcyon, very early on, like there may be others who don't see the need for change, or they're not on board with change. And I wonder if you could speak to it in your experience in the center around what are some of the things that we should look out for those who are not necessarily on board with changes, or like they seem stuck in their ways. How do we work with them? So we go to conferences. A lot of the folks who are on the call right now, we've seen them at conferences. They're the leaders. They're the informal leaders, possibly also the formal leaders. At least they're the thought leaders because they're putting themselves out there. They're sometimes using their own money to go to these conferences. So we've all drank the Kool-Aid. So how about the people who aren't necessarily ready or wanting or on board with change? What do we do with that?
I think as it relates to communication, sometimes our natural tendency is, okay, well, I'm not going to communicate with them as much because they obviously don't want it, which is also not what we should be doing. We maintain consistency across the board, even if we're like, they sat there and rolled their eyes the whole time. Because what I think happens, and I've seen, is when you stop communicating with them because they're not on board, they will then use that, kind of in their ammo against you. Well, we're not all being treated the same. This is what I see. Sometimes it's you just keep going and people will either get on board or not. And I think we've talked about that before, they'll kind of find their way out. But I was just reading a book recently, and I've heard it before, and I've, seen it kind of work, is sometimes when people are not engaged, it's not necessarily because they don't want to, or because they won't ever be engaged in the process, but we kind of have to go out of our way to figure out how to actually engage them. And one of the ways they talked about in this book was actually assigning responsibility. So kind of putting it on them that now, instead of just almost the vagueness of we want a more positive culture, of actually being really specific and intentional with them. Here's a committee we're starting, decorating committee, whatever it is. Yeah. We want you to head it up. And I've found and seen that, finding a way to really specifically engage people is also helpful.
Yeah, and something that's meaningful for them, like a personal invitation. I really like that. So increasing your touch points, increasing communication. No one, just as one last point on increasing your frequency of communication, no one in our profession has ever complained that they are receiving too much information, too much communication. No one has ever said, hey, hey, just could you please back off? I'm just way too informed. Please stop communicating with me. It's always the opposite. And in fact, there's a reason why we all say, for beginning communications, we sure don't communicate very well with each other.
Right.
We think that it's flowing all across, up and down and across the organization, but it's not. Only a few people are very well informed. And so we need to kind of correct that. And the other thing is effectiveness. So if you're going to increase your frequency of communication, you must be effective. So Halcyon mentioned authenticity. Really, it's about emotional intelligence. Some of the skills related to emotional intelligence include empathy, include interpersonal relationship skills, includes emotional expressivity. So really, just bring your emotions online, showing that you are, in fact, understanding, that you know what people are going through. And it's a very tough time. It's a very tough time in our industry. And we're demanding, and I'm going to use that word, we are demanding more and more from our existing personnel. And it can feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And especially when there is the people working on the floor who are part of the mandation, if as a supervisor, you're in a different group and you still get your days off, even though you might backfill mandatory positions, you have more power and control around your schedule. You have more autonomy. If that isn't a cause for empathy, you might even be thinking to yourself, that's what they signed up for. No one signed up for 16-hour days, 7 days a week. Even if they knew that it's a 24-hour shift, even if they knew that overtime was part of it, nobody signed up for some of the things that we're now accepting as the norm. And that's a cause for empathy. And also, we should publicize everything we're doing, every action that we're taking on a weekly basis to make this new norm a thing of the past. So if your agency isn't sharing hiring recruitment statistics, isn't saying like, hey, we're planning to go to do a job fair, a career fair, isn't publicizing how many trainees are currently incoming, how many trainees are currently in, how many trainees succeeded or graduated the program from the last hiring group, all of this is great information. And you might be saying, well, it'll say how bad we are. Great. No one.
They already know.
Yeah, they already know.
They already know.
We've been circling the drain forever. So let's let's call it out. So these are all great ways to use your key performance indicators, use your best practices, use your metrics to bring people on board. We're talking about the majority group of type A overachievers. They want to know what's going on. And so also doing so with emotional intelligence matters a great deal.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, sometimes is we try to like leadership, and I feel like it's a common mistake is sometimes we try to like hide things or think, we don't want people to know this. But then if we think about it, like they already know, they work there, they saw it with their own eyes, they went through the training.
Yeah.
And two, remember, your current people are some of your best recruiters. So and sometimes you're like, they're the ones who are going to be your worst enemies. If you're bringing people in to hire them, but your employees are standing outside when that new person walks by and they go, you don't want to work here, which I guarantee has literally happened in some places.
It happens regularly in many places. Yeah. So, and even during, you say, well, if we're in this dark time where mandatory overtime is just part of it, what are we supposed to say to the people coming in? Like, we don't want to sugarcoat things. We don't want them to have rose-colored glasses coming in. You can say that we're working a ton of overtime right now, and the money's great. And our leadership team is working diligently to bring more people in. We got a pay bump, whether that was last year or 5 years ago. I think it's really about the story that we choose to tell. I mean, that matters a great deal. So what I'd like to know from those of you who are here live and those of you who are tuning in the replay, what's one specific thing that you can do to increase the frequency of your communication touch points, specifically your in-person communication with the people if you're in a formal leadership role, people under your charge, if you're at the line level with the people around you, because that matters a great deal. So what's the one thing that you can do to increase the frequency of your communication touch points in person? And then number two, as you do this, what must you be mindful of when it comes to being effective in sharing your message? Meaning, do I need to watch my RBF? Meaning, do I need to watch my tone? Do I need to listen more effectively? Do I need to ask more questions instead of telling people what to do? These are all great ways of ensuring that A, your message is heard, B, that you're using this time effectively, because we only have a small amount of time anyway, and C, you can know if you check these two boxes that it's worthwhile.
I will just say really quickly, from my own personal experience, I had a manager at one point who would come into the room, only spoke to supervisors. If we were in a conversation, me, them, the supervisor, and I spoke, they would look at the supervisor. And I will tell you right now, because this just reminded me when Melanie said, be personable, go talk. That obviously has made a lasting impression. That was 4.5, 5 years ago. Just the simple act of not acknowledging people can destroy your relationships. Yeah.
So true. Melanie, yeah, thanks for sharing that. Rebecca, thank you. Tina, thank you. Yeah, it is a vulnerable place to be out there in the frontier. But the world has changed because of the pandemic, and we have to come back to being who we once were. And I hear that also so often, that there's this remembrance of the center that we used to have. We used to be fully staffed, or we used to feel like a team. We used to do these things that were human oriented, that were people driven. Let's come back to that. Let's get back to being who we once were. Or if that doesn't apply at your center, you get to break new ground and create the type of culture that you want to be a part of. Yeah,
such
awesome.
Comments if you're on live or watching the replay.
Great
so
comments.
many things people are doing or are going to try to do. Because I think it's true. Really quickly, as we wrap up, I want to be conscious of everyone's time. We do. And I didn't realize it until you said it. We've kind of used the pandemic as an excuse to do what we've been doing because of the pandemic, but we don't have to.
Right.
We can go back to what it was. We don't have to say this is the new normal. It doesn't have to be the new normal. We can, do things that we used to do. So I like it.
Yeah, I do too. Crystal, great comment. Tammy, thank you so much. Nicole, thank you. And certainly if there's anything that I can do for you, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And certainly Halcyon is a wealth of resources and knowledge and information as well. Halcyon, thank you so much for the invitation to be here to have this conversation.
Fantastic. As always, the invitation's always open. I'm sure everyone would love to have you back. If you guys don't know, we do a conference together, the foundation, along with Adam Timm and the Healthy Dispatcher and his whole team that's growing. 2024, we're in Knoxville. There's a link under the offers tab. We're in early bird pricing. If you want to catch this again, you will get a link for the replay within the next day. We will also be putting it up on our Apple podcast channel so you can listen to the audio. And with that, we will let you go on. We'll be back in 2 weeks with Cassie Sexton talking about finding your purpose and keeping it. So also really looking forward to that conversation as well. Be sure to like our ECC Essentials Facebook page to stay up to date and get the registration link for that. I think that's actually everything now. Now I will let you guys get back to your day. Thank you again, Adam. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and we will see you all back here in 2 weeks.